I still remember the collective gasp that filled the courtroom when the video began playing on the large projection screen. There sat Deborah Wilson, though everyone in our neighborhood knew her simply as Karen. Her face contorted with rage as she screamed at my children from our own backyard. The footage was crystal clear, her designer handbag swinging wildly as she jabbed her manicured finger toward my terrified kids. Her voice reaching that unmistakable pitch that had become infamous across social media. "Those little brats don't deserve to live in this neighborhood," she shrieked on screen before grabbing a baseball bat from beside our garden shed and smashing our solar lights one by one. As the video continued playing, I glanced over at Karen sitting primly at the plaintiff's table in her crisp blue pantsuit. Her face had drained of all color. When the footage showed her threatening to call Child Protective Services because my eyes sore of a swing set was bringing down property values, her eyes widened in horror. This wasn't how she had planned her defamation lawsuit against me to go. The judge's expression had changed from polite interest to unmistakable disgust. As the video rolled on, when the clip finally ended, Karen suddenly clutched at her chest dramatically. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward onto the table before sliding awkwardly to the floor. Her attorney looked mortified, kneeling beside her as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge called for order, and a court officer checked her vitals. Within moments, Karen's eyes fluttered open and she struggled to her feet, her perfectly styled blonde bob now disheveled. "It was edited," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "That's not me. They doctored that footage." Her wild eyes darted around the courtroom as if searching for someone to believe her. The judge's gavel came down with 3 sharp cracks. "Mrs. Wilson, control yourself or I will have you removed," he warned sternly. That's when Karen made her final mistake. "This is a conspiracy," she shrieked, pointing at me. "He's trying to destroy me because I enforce the rules. Look at him smirking. He's a monster." The judge nodded to the bailiffs who approached Karen immediately. "Mrs. Wilson, you are now in contempt of court," the judge announced, his voice cutting through her continued protests. The path to this dramatic courtroom showdown began 6 months earlier, when my family and I moved into Oakage Estates, a picturesque suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and a notoriously strict homeowners association. I am an architectural engineer by profession, and my wife is a pediatrician. We have 2 kids, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Noah, and we'd saved for years to afford a home in this good school district. Within our first week, we received a welcome letter from the HOA. It wasn't actually welcoming at all, but rather a 6-page document detailing every possible violation we might commit, all signed by the HOA president, Deborah Wilson. I dutifully read through the guidelines and believed we were following them to the letter. But apparently, I had underestimated the zeal with which Karen approached her role as neighborhood dictator. The trouble began when I built a modest wooden playset in our fenced backyard for the kid's birthday. I had checked the HOA regulations twice and confirmed there were no restrictions against playsets as long as they weren't visible from the street, which ours wasn't. I even used natural colored wood stain to ensure it blended with the environment. The kids were ecstatic, spending hours swinging and climbing, while my wife and I enjoyed coffee on the patio, finally feeling at home. 3 days later, I found a hot pink notice taped to our front door. Violation. Unauthorized structure detected. Remove within 48 hours, or face daily fines of $100. It was signed with a flourishing Deborah Wilson, HOA president, and included a smiley face sticker that somehow made it even more infuriating. I immediately called the number listed and got Karen herself. "The playset is completely within regulations," I explained calmly. "It's not visible from the street and there's nothing in the bylaws prohibiting it." Her laugh was condescending. "Well, I can see it from my second-floor window, which means it's visible, which means it's a violation. The bylaws clearly state no unsightly structures. But it's not unsightly, I countered. And visibility from your private window isn't mentioned anywhere in the regulations. I am the HOA president, she said, her voice dripping with self-importance. I decide what constitutes unsightly in this community. Remove it or pay the consequences. What followed was 2 months of escalating harassment. Karen would park her luxury SUV across from our house and take photos of our property daily. She'd leave additional violation notices for ridiculous infractions: grass half an inch too tall, a bicycle left on our porch for 15 minutes, the wrong shade of white on our window trim. One afternoon, I spotted her measuring the distance between our mailbox and the curb with a tape measure. When we didn't remove the playset, the tactics escalated. She began approaching my children at the bus stop, telling them their daddy was a bad man who doesn't follow rules. She cornered my wife in the grocery store, loudly announcing to other shoppers that we were bringing criminal elements into the neighborhood with our hillbilly playground. At the monthly HOA meeting, she proposed a new bylaw specifically targeting recreational equipment exceeding 4 feet in height, clearly aimed directly at us. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I was inside making pancakes when I heard Emma screaming from the backyard. I raced outside to find Karen standing next to our playset, garden shears in hand, cutting the rope on the swing, while my daughter watched in tears. Noah was hiding under the slide deck, terrified. "What are you doing?" I shouted, rushing to get between her and my children. "You're trespassing on private property." Karen's face contorted with rage. "This monstrosity is bringing down all our property values." "I've warned you repeatedly." She waved the shears dangerously close to my face. "I have the right as HOA president to remove violations myself, after sufficient notification." I calmly told my children to go inside to their mother, never taking my eyes off Karen. "That is absolutely false, and you know it," I said quietly. "You have no legal right to enter our property or destroy our belongings. I'm asking you to leave now before I call the police." That's when she completely lost control, launching into a tirade about people like us ruining the neighborhood. She paced manically around our yard, gesturing wildly with the shears, ranting about how she'd fought for years to maintain standards in Oakage Estates. Then, to my shock, she marched over to our garden shed, grabbed a baseball bat my son had left outside, and began smashing our solar garden lights one by one. "You want to play games?" she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "I'll show you what happens to rule breakers." She swung the bat at a ceramic flower pot, shattering it across our patio. All the while, she hurled insults about my parenting, my profession, and even made threats about calling Child Protective Services to rescue those poor children from their incompetent father. What Karen didn't know was that after weeks of harassment, I had installed security cameras around our property the previous weekend. Every word, every action, every threat was being recorded in high-definition video, with crystal-clear audio. As she continued her rampage, I calmly took out my phone and dialed 911. "There's an intruder on my property destroying my belongings and threatening my family," I explained to the dispatcher, keeping my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. "I fear for my children's safety." When Karen heard me mention the police, she froze mid-swing, the bat still raised above her head. For a brief moment, rationality seemed to return to her eyes. Then, with one final kick at the broken garden lights, she stormed toward the fence gate, turning back only to shout, "This isn't over! The HOA board will foreclose on your house for these violations." The police arrived within minutes, taking statements and reviewing the security footage. They were visibly disturbed by what they saw. Clear case of criminal trespass, vandalism, and possibly menacing, one officer noted. They advised me to file for a restraining order immediately and suggested I share the video evidence with the other HOA board members. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly the footage would spread. I had sent the video to the 4 other board members with a formal complaint about Karen's behavior. By the next morning, one of them had apparently shared it more widely. Within 48 hours, Backyard Karen Loses It over playset had accumulated over 2 million views across social media platforms. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets. Comment sections filled with outrage as viewers watched a grown woman destroying property and terrorizing children over a swing set. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Karen's employer, a real estate company, ironically, placed her on administrative leave pending investigation. The other HOA board members called an emergency meeting and voted to suspend her presidency. Neighbors I'd never spoken to stopped by with cookies and supportive notes, many sharing their own Karen stories from over the years. Through it all, I maintained a dignified silence publicly. I declined interview requests and asked neighbors not to approach Karen's house or family. This isn't about revenge, I told anyone who asked. It's about protecting my children and ensuring this doesn't happen to another family. Karen, however, took a different approach. As the video continued to gain traction, she hired an attorney and filed a defamation lawsuit against me, claiming the footage was maliciously edited to make her appear unhinged. Her lawsuit alleged that I had doctored the video to remove evidence of prior provocation and shared it with malicious intent to destroy her reputation. She demanded $500,000 in damages for lost wages, emotional distress, and reputational harm. Which brings us back to that fateful day in court. After Karen's contempt charge and removal from the courtroom, the judge called a 15-minute recess. When proceedings resumed, Karen had composed herself somewhat, though her mascara had left dark streaks down her cheeks. The judge wasted no time delivering his ruling. "This court finds no evidence whatsoever of video manipulation," he stated firmly. In fact, the plaintiff's own expert witness confirmed the footage's authenticity. Not only am I dismissing this defamation suit with prejudice, but I am referring Mrs. Wilson to the district attorney's office for charges of perjury, filing a false claim, criminal trespass, vandalism, and making threats against a child. The judge looked directly at Karen over his glasses. Additionally, Mrs. Wilson will pay the defendant's legal fees in full. Court officers, please take the plaintiff into custody. As 2 officers approached with handcuffs, Karen's face registered pure shock. "You can't do this," she shrieked, backing away from the table. "Do you know who I am? I've been president of the HOA for 7 years. "The charge is contempt of court plus recommendation for criminal charges," the officer explained calmly as he secured the cuffs around her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." Karen's wails echoed through the courtroom as they led her away. "This isn't fair. It was just a stupid playset. They're ruining my life over a playset." Later that afternoon, the district attorney announced formal charges against Karen for multiple offenses. If convicted on all counts, she faced up to 2 years in prison and fines exceeding $10,000. The HOA board called an emergency neighborhood meeting that evening, where they unanimously voted to dissolve the current governance structure entirely in favor of a more democratic model. Karen's husband put their house on the market the following day. As for me, I stood on my porch that evening watching Emma and Noah playing happily on their swing set. The very structure that had triggered such an outlandish series of events. The setting sun cast long shadows across our lawn, while the sound of my children's laughter filled the air. Sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected ways.